But not this one.
This is my proudest accomplishment in my whole life. Is this sweater?
This sweater.
It's like the first big thing I ever did. And I'm like the 5 kids and the winery, like whatever. This sweater was more work than all of it. It went in and out so many times. Anyway, there you go.
There were more naughty words involved in making this sweater than 5 kids of the same. Than delivering the 5 kids.
Not quite, but probably close. Anyway, so today's, I think we're good. Is Zoe, everybody's in?
All right, excellent.
Great, awesome. Well, we have this fancy new Facebook, I think, portal technology. We probably don't look any different to you, but we can see way more. And if we dance around, supposedly it follows us. So it's a little crazy. Anyway, so we'll see. I hope it means that everyone will be able to hear us better.
I hope so.
Than other times. So that's the goal.
As long as Nicole can hear us, you can read sign language. You're okay.
You're good, right? Exactly. So it's great to see so many people coming out. I feel like it has been a long time, even though it was only a month, but it's felt like a long month. So anyway, we're gonna have a nice time and just talk about wine.
Winemaking, yeah.
So today's agenda, I guess, is just winemaking 101. So we are going to walk through just kind of the basics of what goes into to just making wine. But this is a great format, I guess, for any kinds of questions that you have. So because we could get onto one topic forever. So yes. Always we love it when anybody out there kind of drives the conversation, because then we can know which rabbit holes to go down. I'm getting notes saying you can hear better, so that's great. So winemaking. Should we talk about the wine we're drinking first?
Yes, we should.
Okay.
Do you know what it is?
I do.
Okay.
Oh, look, I can place it. Let's see. No, I can place it best when I see the label. Sure. I'm really good.
Makes it a little easier.
So it is. Oh, you guys can't see the label.
Yeah.
There's see our fancy portal. You can probably see the label, right? Can you see it? What are we having?
Crumbling Rock,
yeah.
2015.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to taste this. We haven't tasted this in probably 2 years. I think the last time we tried it.
Oops, it's off. You're off. You got to come back over because it followed me.
Oh, it followed you?
Followed me because I'm.
This thing is like a dog. It follows us.
It's really weird. There you go. You talk and it won't follow me so much. Okay.
All right.
There you go. So Greg, you're having the 13. Anybody else drinking a Crumbling Rock out there? Ooh, 17. How's the 17?
Yum. Okay, so so let's talk about this 15. This is interesting. I last time when I had this 2 years ago, I thought it was a little the wine word that the word that wine critics anyway use is closed. That it was sometimes a wine and bottle will be really good for the first year or two after bottling it, and it will just shut down and become still good, but a little simple. And I thought this had gotten kind of a one note feel a little bit for a while. And then often it's like that for a year or two, and then it blossoms and becomes even better than it was before. And so I'm excited to see that this wine is back open and really nice. It's longer, it's smoother, it's a little bit more electric. Can I say that word? I'm going to say that word, electric, than it was 2 years ago. So that's a really good sign. Our wines don't always do that. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody with a theory of why that happens, other than that wines are alive and they do what they want to do in the bottle. But I don't know that anybody has any scientific theory for why it does, but it's certainly a well-known phenomenon, and especially on Bordeaux varieties for some reason. They do that a lot.
Yeah, they tend to come and go. You heard the term tight too. People that talk about a wine tight or closed, and it's often that you're getting fewer layers of flavor, and that like I always feel like it's like the tannins are coming, they're kind of overwhelming other stuff. Like you're kind of missing out on a more subtle stuff anyway.
And I got
kind of long,
they can be a little simple like this. I remember, this is very different. I remember it being very upfront and a little bit not short, but not as long as we like to have a Crumbling Rock taste. This is much longer than it was 2 years ago. It's stretching itself back out, which is really nice to see. And I thought
Me too.
2 years ago also that I could, the influence of the Petit Verdot, which we got at 24%, was a little bit strong. Petit Verdot is fabulous in wines, but sometimes can take over if you get too much. I think this may be the most we've ever put in a
it is, yeah.
crumbling rock blend for that reason. She's worried about it, and now it's settling back in, and we're getting more of the Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot notes in this, which is great.
It's great. I see lots of leaf stones out there people are drinking, and other vintages of crumbling rock. And Sam, I see you're showing off that it's nice and warm in San Antonio, so you can have Bedlam. You can drink Bedlam when it's cold, but we're not needing the warm weather wines here so much.
Not so much.
There's a little twinge of jealousy. Although it's pretty sunny today. It wasn't so bad out.
That's great.
It wasn't so
Good
bad.
day. Nice day. So
great. All right. So how do we make it? What's that? You want to start?
And I just want to say, we also spent our day with the wines today. In the barrel room, at the tanks, opening things, smelling things, taking samples out, which is when days that you work with the wine are good days.
Those are fun. Well, I was thinking, I was starting as we were letting everyone in to ask, because I should know the answer, but don't, if we have a plan for next month yet, because I am all hot about blending, because we were pulling samples. I see Zoe saying, okay, if you say so. It can be later. It doesn't have to be next month, but
no, next month's good. Yeah.
Good. But we were pulling samples today. I'm starting at the end. This is like one of those novels when they tease you with the last part and then they're going to roll back to the whole story. So blending is the last step of winemaking, really. But we are getting ready to blend the 20 whites and 19 reds. So we are pulled. We pulled the samples for the whites and maybe Passeggiata today. So that was kind of fun. And we're a little nervous because
COVID.
It's time to grow up here. We're going to have to do it all by ourselves. So as many of you know, we work with a consultant from Bordeaux who comes over every year, and he helps us with the winemaking phase. But I feel like that part, the part in the fall now, at least for me, like, I feel like we know what we're doing on that phase. Like when he comes, it's great. And it's kind of like an audit where we go over everything we're doing and we rethink and we ask questions and we just look at our processes. But I don't feel so much like oh my gosh, please tell me how to do it, which we did in the beginning. But then he also usually comes now to help with blending. And I still feel like he's super valuable at that. He just has a great palate and a lot of experience and a lot of imagination of how things are going to taste when you put them together, that we've taken a lot of notes on and paid attention and tried to learn over the years. But because of COVID, we're not going to have him fly over here and do that for fairly evident reasons. So we're going to give it a shot on our own, the two of us, and then we're going to make Melissa. So we've all been quarantining and we're tested and feel like we can be together and taste wine together for the next few days. So we'll come back next month and tell you how we think we did.
Yep. Yeah, I think should be good. We've learned an awful lot the last 20 years, but there's nothing like the experience of tasting thousands of wines and making blends and seeing how they come out. And we have a lot more than we did in 2006 when we did the first time, but 2007. But
we are cheating a little bit. Well, not cheating, but lucky in that 19 was a really good year. So we have really easy stuff to work with. So that is kind of a nice. Yep. I don't know. I can't think of a parallel, but it's like, basically we would have to try pretty hard to screw it up. I think we might be able to do it, but I think
we'll try our best to screw it up.
We're not trying to make magic from anything that's a little rough. We have pretty good starters. So that's great. Yeah.
And I think we talked about before last time, we set aside, or we picked wine for sparkling wine this year. About 600 to 700 cases, and we have never blended a sparkling wine before. So this is going to be interesting and different, and something we're not. We've read about how to do it, and we've tasted a lot of wines over the years, but we've not really ever tasted base wines for sparkling. You're tasting this wine, and you have to blend it now, and then it's going to go into the bottle. And then undergo a second fermentation and change and be different. And so this is it's not like we can go buy a bunch of champagnes and taste them and say, oh, we like this better than that. Like, we don't know what the base wine tasted like. So that's going to be interesting.
Right. Fun. Just to roll back, there was a question. We are using the champagne method champenoise. So that is, if you remember from when we did the sparkling talk, but basically what we have is wine that was picked very early, went through the fermentation at so we had a low sugar level. So it's fermented completely, but it has very low alcohol because it had low sugar to begin with. And then right now it's a kind of very acidic, low alcohol still wine. And then we're going to bottle it and then add more yeast and a little more sugar. And then it will go through this other fermentation. So when we start to blend it, we really are trying to use a lot of imagination as far as how is it all going to go further. Yeah, Jean, you had a question about the chispa. The chispa was Albarino. And we had made that, like, we had picked it at a higher ripeness level. So we didn't, we didn't do the fermentation in 2 parts, really. We fermented it up to the point where we thought it had enough sugar left to get the pressure we wanted in the bottle. And then we just bottled it rather than getting a wine totally dry and then kind of starting it over. So, and then we disgorged it and cleaned the yeast and all that. So it's kind of a champagne method. There's another term for that when you do it.
I think it's called ancestral. I think is.
There you go.
It was the original way of doing it, and then they came up with the champagne method, which is the one most
we think of as traditional now. But yeah.
So, anyway, we are off on.
I know. So anyway, so the basics in how to make wine.
Winemaking is pretty much easy. Marry well. Get a glass of wine, sit on the couch, let your wife do it.
Totally.
The rest of it is
easy.
Take over from here.
Take over from here. We do laugh because as I think I confessed over the summer, I often go away for a bunch in the summer. And Ed stays home while it's like 1,000 degrees and works in the vineyard outside. And then I like come swanning in August and September and decide like, okay, now I get to make the wine, which we fight over because it's the most fun part. But anyway. So, I mean, the basic process of winemaking is just letting yeast eat sugar and turn it into alcohol for you. So it's a pretty, that's kind of the fundamental of what's going on. When we think of it as starting, I guess is really in the vineyard as far as just trying to start out with grapes that are really good. So if we have grapes that are ripe and interesting and clean and concentrated, then the winemaking is kind of easy. I mean, you start out with something that's really good. And it's kind of like if you're cooking and you start out with really good ingredients, it's going to be easier to have a great product at the end. If you start out with something that's a little wonkier, like you might be able to make a good dish out of it, but it's going to be a little bit trickier. So that's kind of step one is the vineyard. And I know we like to talk about the vineyard, but we are going to stick to the winery today.
Yeah, I think I'll try to stick to it.
No talking about rocks. Yeah, why they make it better.
Sarah said a couple of things that I think are great in there that, I mean, people talk about winemakers and really the winemakers are yeast. We don't make wine. The yeast do it. The only known way to create alcohol that I know of is yeast. So if you're going to make bourbon or something, the first thing you do is you have yeast create a bunch of alcohol for you, and then you concentrate it. If you're making wine, you have there's no other way. So they're the ones doing it. So you're trying to kind of let the natural process happen. It's when you have juice, it's really hard to get it to not ferment.
True.
And if you think about it, like apple juice and things has additives or cider additives to keep it from fermenting because there are yeast everywhere. There are yeasts all over the rooms now. There are yeasts outside. Their yeasts are just floating around everywhere, and they want to do their thing. So and what they want to do really is take that juice and turn it into essentially vinegar. And wine is sort of the halfway house on the way from juice to vinegar. And our goal is to try to get it to make the best possible wine and then stop. And in a nutshell, that's sort of what a winemaker does, is try to herd the yeasts around to do the right thing and then get them to not do it, or the yeast, other things will take over, other microbes will take over and go all the way to vinegar. So I'd love to know how to make vinegar someday, because they all have their own. The people make vinegar have their own strategies and things for doing it, but they're also trying to get this natural process to happen, but in a very different way than we are. So yeah, we bring grapes in, and then all right, we've got a bunch of grapes from the. I'm not allowed to mention that word, so
no, but we don't bring them in. It made me sound like they were coming from somewhere else.
Grapes arrive from a very close area that's got a bunch of things on it, and they're in the winery, and then the next question for us is how do we get something to happen that's going to make a great wine? And for whites, usually I'd say 99% of the time, whites are just fermented with just the juice, without the skins, without the seeds, without the pulp, just the juice. There are some exceptions. The orange wines that you see, there are sometimes even we let the juice sit with the skins
but a matter of hours, not days or weeks.
And not fermenting yet, but to try to absorb some good things from them. The thing is, there are polyphenols and other stuff in grape skins, both red and white, that white wine can make the wine sort of heavy and kind of, I don't know, plodding. I don't know what the word is, but and so you mostly try to get away from them. And there are some exceptions and some of those wines are really good. So we don't really do a lot of skin contact.
Different style,
different style. So for winemaking for whites, since what we do is we bring them in, we want to now separate the juice from everything else. The first thing they do is they go into the big press, and that gently presses the juice out of them. Nope.
First we take them off the stems.
Oh, well, yeah. No, sometimes.
Usually.
Yeah, usually we do. Good point. So we got you can put whole clusters into the press, which did with
just
our
the whole bunch. The whole bunch of grapes, right?
We do with our sparkling.
Okay. You can be
with our still whites, we tend to de-stem them. It's called. We have a machine that basically shakes the grapes off of the stems and puts the stems away. The stems also have phenolics and all that kind of stuff in them. When you shake the grapes off, it's pretty much impossible to do it without breaking some. So a little bit of the juice gets out, and that's the downside of de-stemming, is a little bit of the juice gets out, and that juice is then exposed to air, and it can start oxidizing. And what happens when you oxidize juice is you lose some of the aromas and things you're going to get in the wine eventually. So that's bad. The good part is that you can get a lot more in a press load, so it's a lot less work. There's always that. You get about triple the number of de-stemmed grapes in one press load than you do if you put the whole clusters straight in. And you also get the chance to do some of this skin contact, the ability to have the juice soaking the outsides of the skins. Chardonnay in particular is good for this. You get some interesting aromas. If you don't do it for very long and at not that high a temperature, you can get some interesting aromas. And if you do it too long, you start to get that heaviness into the wines that you don't want. So so we tend to do the de-stemming, not always.
You also you tend to get more of the juice out of the grape without having to press as hard. So you tend to, even though you might get a little bit of air exposure in the small amount of juice that's that kind of cracks out of the skins right away, you tend to be able to get the rest of the juice out of the grapes without having to crush quite so hard. So it just moves a little bit better through the press. So we end up with more wine, and generally, I would say better. It depends on the wine a little bit.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want a little bit of that skin, so it just depends. But
we've done it both ways, and our sense of it. And again, we're new with the sparkling wine thing. The sparkling wines are almost never de-stemmed because they're really sensitive to heaviness of any kind. We actually are okay with a little bit of
weightiness.
We'll call it. Yeah, in our whites, you see, especially for instance, those of you who like the Bedlam, that is a wine that is particularly made to be more weighty, and we kind of like that.
Yeah.
So, but in a sparkling wine, which is supposed to sort of light up be like,
right.
I don't know,
be light. Well,
light
it's just light and crisp and bright and kind of, well, effervescent from the bubbles, but even just effervescent in terms of kind of feel aside from actual bubbliness.
Yeah.
You don't want a lot of skin contact because you're going to lose that.
And we could go down the rabbit hole of, we could spend 3 hours probably talking about presses and different kinds of presses and how they press and how hard you press versus how many times you turn a press to move the grapes around so you get more juice out of it. But we won't. We'll try not to do that. But these are all the things that we think hard about, and we have bought a special kind of press which inflates from the middle instead of from one side, that we think gives us we can press more gently and get more of the best juice out without having to rotate the press and break the whole bunch of grapes up, which tends to rip things and get that bad things. And we can go on and on, but we don't know what we're doing is right, but we have our methods.
Theories,
and,
yeah. So then we are just to the press, which is day one, or actually day two, because we do pick the grapes, and then we usually put them in our cold storage room and get them cold overnight. Because when we do this whole process, we want to keep them very, very cold. And the colder that the grapes are when we go through any process with them, the more that we protect the aromas, and the more that we're going to be able to stop the yeast from getting started. So yeast like a kind of warm, a nice warm environment, like not hot, but 60s, 70s, 80s are nice temperatures for yeast. So if we can get the temperature very low, we're going to just slow down yeast getting started. And that is going to let the juice kind of sit for a little while before fermentation starts, which is one of the things we try to do. So we get the,
and that sitting for 3 days, 7 days, sometimes 10 days even. I think the French call it stabulation, I think is the word. And it's not done very much. And we do it most of the time. We did less of it this year. But the idea is that juice sitting there with it's got a bunch of stuff and little pieces of skin and little I don't know, the whole when you press
bits of pulp left, there's just like little bits of grapiness,
that it's gonna get some aromas and flavors from that as juice. And I've seen a bunch of side-by-side studies, and people are like, well, we think the stuff we held for a week is better, but it's unclear, and it seems to make a little bit of a difference. But what it does in the winery is it ties up your tanks for a while, for much longer, and it takes a lot of energy to keep the wine chilled. Cool. So we're trying to go back and forth on how much that really helps or hurts. Well, it doesn't hurt the wine, but does it really help enough to say, yeah, do we want to spend all that extra electricity keeping those tanks cold? So we're experimenting with it.
So I'm going to roll back a little bit to a few questions because we have questions. We don't even have the wine in the tank. Well, once it goes through the press, bam, into the tank. There, got it into the tank. That was easy. Mark Paul, what is my favorite part of winemaking? I like playing with the wine. So my very favorite part is probably coming later in the red wines when we shut a lot of the tanks. And I'll note that.
Oh yeah, you just love that.
That's my very favorite. But we're not there yet in sequence, so hold that thought. Then the other is really just when the fermentations start and you start to just see a change in the flavor profile, when it's really sweet and then it's a little less sweet and you start to get some like acidity, the acidity coming in, and you just start to begin to pick up some of the alcoholic flavors. And just seeing that transformation day after day is really fun. So the reds especially, I feel like we are much more involved in the red wine making when we get to that point. So we get to like swim in the smell of wine much more. The whites, we go through this process and then they kind of go into the tank and sit or go into the barrel. And there's not a lot of our time spent with the white wines. Yeah. but the reds are more fun. So we'll get back to that.
The
yeah.
upfront, and for white wines, the upfront part, the pressing, how long you leave it, all that makes a big difference in the wine. After that, it just kind of does what it does, and you just make sure it doesn't get too hot, too cold.
Right.
And then it finishes. You know, we can talk about barrel fermentation or not. There's some other certainly decisions that we make there, but even in barrel, most of it just kind of happens. So
yeah.
Reds, not so much.
So then Steve had a couple of questions about just the sugar, the limiting factor for bottle fermentation, or is alcohol, or how is it all managed? I think this is back to the sparkling wine, since it sounds like we're talking about fermentation in bottle. And for any fermentation, the amount of sugar is the limiting factor. So the basic process of fermentation is yeast they consume sugar and oxygen. They need a fair amount of oxygen, and they transform it into alcohol and carbon dioxide. And that's pretty much like, I feel like if you ever took chemistry and you had to like write out the equation of the different atoms that went in and went out, like that's what you come up with. And the amount of sugar that's there in the first place is going to decide how much alcohol can be created, up until the point where your second question comes in, which is, yes, if the alcohol gets too high, it will kill the yeast, because basically alcohol is a waste product for yeast. So over time, it starts to get poisonous to them. And then the third thing that can affect that is pressure. So if they're in an environment with a lot of pressure, the point at which the alcohol will become too much for the yeast to survive is much lower than if they're out in the open. So when you're in a bottle, you're going to end up with a lower alcohol and no more fermentation than you would if they were just in a tank. We generally, in that whole sparkling process, we try to just put as much sugar in as we want to ferment completely. And then if the wine wants a little sugar at the very end, once we do the disgorging and the whole second part of the bottling process, we add a little sugar then. So if that answered that question. And yeah, the bubble factor is a huge issue. So when you're adding sugar into sparkling wine in a bottle, you have to be really careful about how much you add, because you can add enough that it'll blow up the bottle. So you just have to be, that's why champagne bottles are so big and thick.
Yeah.
And they have to be really strong.
The champagne method is one when it's done under pressure in the bottle. For some reason, the bubbles are smaller. You get those tiny, tiny little bubbles when you're at the bottle. If you look at a Prosecco or something, which is done in a pressurized tank, you just can't get the tiny little bubbles. And I don't really know why, but that's they say. And then there's a whole art in sparkling wine that we're learning about foaming and what's the other word? I can't remember the other one. But when you try to get the yeast out, disgorge it, you don't want the wine to spew all out of the bottle because you lose it all. So there's a foaming action. But then there's also when you pour it into the glass, you want that bunch of bubbles that rises up.
Kind of, yeah.
And I can't. There's a word for it, and
it's like the head on a beer. I don't remember what it's called. A glass of wine.
There's a whole art of what makes that. How do you do that? And this is bad for it, and this is good for it, and then it's kind of crazy. So it's good. So there was a comment about. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
About the press we describe as a bladder press, and those are supposed to be very gentle, I guess, presses. So really popular.
And generally, Giselle, you had asked about the yeast, and generally we just use ambient yeast for the most part. Once in a while, there's a circumstance where we decide to bring in a commercial yeast, particularly if we had a very high sugar wine, because as I said, we want the wines to get fermented completely dry, and they won't necessarily, if the alcohols get too high, it can be a problem. So if we run into that, we'll bring in a different yeast. But for the most part, we like to go with our regular yeast. Oops, there's our door.
Yeah.
We'll just
this is a rabbit hole. We could go down for hours. Can I do 2 minutes of rabbit hole?
You can do 2 minutes of rabbit hole.
So yeast is really sort of interesting and controversial and kind of fun. Like there are the commercial yeast. It sounds awful to say commercial yeast, but they're all natural. They're just yeast that were were captured somewhere that someone noticed something interesting about. Like
right.
This fermentation had a whole lot of sugar and it still went completely dry, even up to 16% alcohol. So they go in and they find those yeast and they basically regrow them in a yeast factory and grow more of them and sell them and say, this is one that can go up to 16% alcohol.
Right.
And there's yeast you can buy for all sorts of different things. So yes, exactly.
Exactly.
Pandemic sourboat baking is right up.
It's right there.
So
right.
The yeast, so there are all these commercial yeasts out there, and of course there are companies that sell them. And what they'll say is there are all these spoilage yeasts out there, bad yeast that will make bad wine. You don't want to use those. What you want to do is press your juice or load your red wine tank and immediately put a huge dose of this commercial yeast in, and it just outcompetes all the natural ones and takes over the fermentation. That is controversial. I think for us, we have done it enough to realize, maybe there are some bad yeasts out there that ruin things, but they don't seem to ruin things at Black Ankle. So, 2020, we didn't use a single yeast from purchased anywhere. I think maybe 19, we used one. And I think it had been about 10 years before that, we hadn't used any. Now, we did use some when we first started because we weren't sure what we were doing. And it's quite possible, in fact, known that when you have a commercial yeast, it'll escape and live on the walls or on the equipment or on the, won't live on the tanks because we clean them and sterilize them, but it will live other places. And, there's no way to get rid of it completely. So we don't really know what's fermenting our wines. We do, there are some clues. We know that there's some wacky stuff that we have from our vineyard that is in there because we often see the sugar drop without any CO2 bubbles for the first 1 or 2% of sugar. And that is there's one special strain of wacky yeast, which is there's no commercial version of it, but it exists around and it will ferment without creating carbon dioxide. So
undiscernible amount of carbon dioxide. Yeah, we can't tell it's there.
Whatever it is, I can't even begins with P, but whatever it was. And on the other side of the coin is those of us who kind of believe that when you use what's out there, what you're getting is instead of one yeast doing it all, you're getting a whole collection of different stuff in there. And many of the yeast, the families of yeast die. We talked about how yeast will die at 16%. That's a yeast family called Saccharomyces, and that's the major wine yeast. It's what makes wine sort of possible. It really makes alcohol possible in total.
Right.
But that's really the only one that can go that high. Most of them die out at 3% alcohol, 2%, 4%. Yeah. So you get in the beginning of these fermentations all this wacky stuff in there that is doing, who knows what it's doing, but this one, and then that one dies and another one takes over, and then that one dies and another one takes over. And then finally a Saccharomyces, and there are wild ones of those all around, will come in and finish. So after years of the commercial yeast companies saying, there's no difference, the wines are just as good, you're just much safer using a commercial yeast.
Right.
They've started to come out with these 2 yeast packs where you add this wacky little version of yeast first, and then 2 days later you add the Saccharomyces. So you let the wacky one do the first couple of percent, and they're saying, those wines are more interesting and complex. Our sense is like, why deal with all that? Why do all that work? We're just going to let what happens. Right. And
it's just another capturing of our place and the environment and where the grapes grow and everything else. So Ed said, well, these wacky yeast and we have no idea what they're doing. But we know they're still fermenting. They're still creating alcohol. Yeah. Our thought is they're creating flavors and textures and depth that are going to be more interesting than if we just use one yeast all the way through. Yeah. So it's not entirely like, we have no idea. I mean, we don't know specifically which yeast are doing which because you can't tell. But we do find when we go through this process that we like the result. So
one of these years we're gonna freeze. We're gonna take a wine and take a sample every day and freeze them all and send them off to a lab, and probably cost us a couple $1,000 for somebody to figure out what all the yeasts are. But then we'll kind of know like what's going on at Black Ankle. What is doing the fermentation.
And that's just because it would be fun. We don't need to. It does not going to. there's nothing that would change in terms of how we did it.
No.
So the basic process. So I think we've gotten, we keep getting on the tangents, but the white wines first, they come in, they go through the press, and then just juice goes into the tank. And even if we decide that we're going to keep the juice and the skins together for a little while, it would be a matter of hours, and we'll do it just in the tank. We would never do it. I mean, in the press rather, sorry. So white wine skins never go into the tank. The juice goes in, we keep it cold for a few days, and then we just let it get warm. And as it gets warm, this fermentation starts on its own. And that's really what we usually expect. For the Chardonnay and more the Viognier and sometimes GV, we will, as soon as the fermentation starts in the tank, we will put it into barrels, and the fermentations continue in barrels. So we just let that fermentation go. And then the whites, they kind of take it from there. They don't get a lot of attention throughout the fermentation process. We need to give them a little bit of air, but because there are no skins or anything in there, the amount of air they need, and because we're not trying to extract anything out of the skins, they don't need a whole lot of air. It's just a little bit. So we might get a few buckets for a tank, or a few liters of wine that we pull out and give air and put back into a barrel. And that's really it. And then we watch the temperatures. The one thing that we worry about is if the temperature gets too hot, we could have a problem, or too cold. So, and that's it. We use all oak barrels. So primarily French, although some of them are a mix of different European forests, but we use all oak barrels. They just have some kind of oak. So, and for the whites, for the most part, we use fairly neutral barrels, meaning that they have been used over and over, but we do mix in a few new barrels as well. And for the white wines, what we find is that if the wine is fermented in a barrel, it picks up kind of richness and weightiness, but in a good way, like heft and depth and kind of creaminess, but not a lot of crazy oak flavors if you go through the fermentation in barrel. To me, it always seems a little kind of counterintuitive that if you ferment it in barrel, you get less of an oak impact than if you add it into barrel after fermentation, but that is what happens. So it somehow integrates into the sauce better if you do a fermentation in barrel. So if you're looking to make a really oaky wine, you will actually ferment in a tank and then put it into the barrel afterwards. If you're trying to make like an oaky Chardonnay or something, that's usually how it would be done. But that's not so much what we're going for. So we do that. So that's kind of the whites, and then they sit in barrels. When they're done fermenting, let's talk about mallow with the reds. We do sometimes malolactic on the whites, but that's only part of them. And we'll skip that till we get to the reds, because all the reds do.
Yeah, basically from there it's almost done. We
And then we
have in
stir
barrel,
them.
we stir them.
Yeah.
We top them every week. We stir them because all those dead yeasts fall to the bottom. And if you stir them, the yeast break down much faster. When they break down, they add richness to the wine. So the more you stir them, the faster they break down and the more richness you get. And we like that. We like that feeling in our white wine. So we do a lot of stirring of barrels. We've experimenting this year with some new barrel racks, which have the barrels on wheels. So theoretically, you can stir it by just doing this.
They're really heavy.
Haven't worked yet.
They're really heavy.
It's an experiment.
Yeah. So the white wines stay on their lees until we're ready to bottle, basically, which is about 6 months or 8 months. I mean, these whites that we picked in this fall, so we finish picking the whites second week of September. They'll be bottled in it's the first week in April. So that's it. That's the whole white wine kind of arc, I guess, from grape to bottle. It's just about 6, 8 months, not very long. And they stay on the lees until really a couple weeks before we bottle. When we're doing the blends and we're kind of cleaning up the wines and getting them ready to bottle, they come out of the barrel and go into tank just to await the bottler. But that's it. We should get onto the reds.
We make reds.
Yeah. I see a few So the reds kind of have the opposite process, I would say, or partly. So they come in, we also grow them, we pick them, we bring them in, keep them cold overnight. All that's the same. And then we go through the destemming process. So again, There are red wines that are made with the whole cluster into the tank. We tried it once with Pinot, I think.
We tried it once,
but
yeah.
it's complicated, and it's not usually our thing. So we could talk about why you would want to do it, but let's stick with what we actually do for now.
Most of the Bordeaux varieties and Syrah, you don't need to do
better.
it.
So
for Pinot, you might want to do it, and we tried it some, but
yeah. So the skins, the stems have a lot of tannin in them, and if you have a variety that kind of lacks that, sometimes it's good to put some of the stems into the tank with them. That's all. But for the Bordeaux varieties and Syrah, they have plenty of their own. They've got a lot going on just in the skins. So, and the seeds and the pulp, I guess. So we take them off their, we take them off the stems, and the stems go out back into the vineyard. And then what goes into the tank is the whole berry. So it's the juice, and then it's the pulp, sort of this squishy clear stuff that's in a grape, and the seeds. That's the technical term.
That's squishy
clear stuff.
Right?
And all of that goes into the tank, and the juice itself starts out completely clear. So grape juice starts clear. All of the color is in the skins, and a lot of the interesting flavors are in the skins. So we kind of feel like when you're making a red wine, like our job is to kind of coax out and pull out what's interesting in those skins while going through the fermentation process. That's kind of like we're like a little more involved in that, I guess. So the whole berry gets into the tank, and then we also try to keep it cool for a few days. And the idea of keeping it cold is to just slow the yeast down before, let it sit, and then to just start getting some extraction. And for the reds, we really do want a lot of extraction out of the skins. There's a lot that we're trying to pull out.
And that's called a cold soak. They have names for these, like while it's still juice, before fermentation starts, it's called cold soak. If you leave it with the skins after fermentation, it's called maceration. So if you ever hear those two terms, cold soak is before, maceration is after. And cold soak is another one of those controversial.
Is it worth it? Right.
Is it worth doing? The people who like to do it say that you get a chance for some extraction, because the juice starts to come out of those berries, because all the weight of the ones on top, the ones on the bottom get juice come out of them, but there's no alcohol in there, so they're getting an extraction with zero alcohol, and alcohol is a really good solvent. So you definitely do get a different extraction in cold soak than you would get in maceration, where you have a lot of alcohol. The people who love it say, yeah, that's exactly why you do it. You want to get all your color. You want to do all that with no alcohol to get the bad things out of the skins and seeds. There's some astringency in there. There's things that if you over extract a wine, it can be very bad. The people who say cold soak doesn't matter say that, you get better cold soak up front, but all that stuff comes out anyway. You don't really need to do it. And I'm not sure where we are on that. We've tried everything. Now we kind of, because we don't add yeast, and because we chill the grapes before we process them in the first part, we load them into the tank, and it takes a few days for the native fermentation to get going. You're not adding a bazillion tons of thousands of billions or trillions of yeast. It takes a while for the natural ones to get going and find each other and start reproducing and really get the fermentation going. So we get 3 days of cold soak anyway, sometimes 5 days, sometimes 7 days.
We get a lot more in the beginning of the season than in the end of the season, because there's just more yeast out there. So we usually find that when we bring in, say Syrah or Pinot, Pinot, we usually just try to warm up right away because it can be funky. But anyway, say Syrah or Merlot or Cab Franc, the things that we pick a little bit on the earlier side, they might wait a week before they start fermenting. They'll tend to go, we can keep them a little longer. By the time we get to Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot, which are usually at the end of the cycle, there's so many yeast just floating in the air, and if we have 2 days, and plus by then we're kind of done. Truth be told. I mean, it's the end of the year and we're tired and we've been harvesting forever, and we're usually like, let's just start them. And we can't say that those wines are worse. So I don't know,
Yeah,
we're usually happy with it anyway. So it's kind of hard to say, but
this is the kind of thing that makes winemaker meetings fun. So
right.
You can sit have an hour discussion of cold soak and nobody really knows. And they're like, well, when I tried it.
Yes, one time I did it in 1980.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's kind of funny. So, but that's step one. And then once the red wines, again, once they get going, it's usually sort of, we see a few bubbles and then we'll heat up the tanks. And the tanks, it doesn't look like much, but if you see the tank, they have you can see little kind of weld spots around the edges. And there's actually a jacket that wraps all the way around the tank that has that liquid can flow through, either hot water or glycol, and that can warm the tanks. And just that little bit of warmth around the edges, because the other thing in my chemical equation that fermentation creates is heat. It's very easy to get the tank warm. So, we let the tank warm up. And for the red wines, we try to ferment them fairly warm. We kind of like to be right in 29, 28 Celsius, not above 30, which is like the high 80s, mid 80s, kind of something like that. And that is because the warmer that the environment is, the better the extraction is going to be from the skins. So the more that the juice can absorb from the skins. And we want to have a lot of that. So the red wines, we try to ferment fairly warm. And then there's a big active portion. So the red wines need a lot of oxygen. The yeast tend to go through the fermentation much faster. So they're consuming much more oxygen because they're in a warm environment. The whole kind of chemical reaction is going a lot faster. Everything's happening faster. So they consume a lot more air a lot faster. So we do a lot of what we call pumping over, which is we have a big bin that comes out under the front of the tank. We pour wine into it and just hose of wine, shooting out, and it's picking up air. And then we take it and we pump it back over the top of the tank. And then we have a little kind of sprinkler system on the top of the tank that spins around, and it shoots the juice the juice turning into wine all over what's called the cap, which is the big kind of mass of berries that are floating up on the top of the tank, or towards the juice, the top of the juice, I should say, through fermentation. And so that accomplishes a lot of things. It gets air, it gives air to the yeast, it stirs the tank because the fermentation is a heat creating process. So there are pockets of the tank where the yeast are super active. That'll be really, really, we'll start to go crazy, get really hot. And then some areas where not much is happening, it gets cold. So we want to kind of smooth out that temperature. And it just lets the juice touch the skins one more time. So the more that it washes past the skins, the more that it's going to be able to absorb from those skins.
And that's my favorite part of the winemaking process. I love doing pump overs. You just you open the valve and it's like a fire hose of wine coming out, and it's really fun. And you're smelling it and it's splashing on you, and you're dirty and you're sticky and it's great.
You're taking a bath.
Yes, I'm doing this, and I know that the yeast or the whatever, but when you're adding all that air, it's the yeast are going nuts. They need oxygen, and they're like, yes, give me some more air. And you pump and it's great. And it's quite a lot of fun.
It is fun. That is fun.
Not at 3 a.m., but otherwise it's quite
not so much. But and ideally we try to stagger it so we're not up that late. Yeah. But it depends on the year and what's going on. But that's kind of the first funniest part. And then once that's done, and it's funny, it's really only about maybe 3 days for any given fermentation that we're doing a lot of that pumping over. It's very quick. It's a lot of time. So in a perfect day, we'll do it maybe 5 times in one day, or maybe even more, short periods, and that'll kind of keep everything going. But it's in a very compressed time period. And it's usually until the wines are 2/3-ish, maybe a little over halfway through fermentation, and then we'll stop doing it entirely. If you do it too late in the process, you tend to pick up a lot of kind of astringency and tannin, and we talk about the wines feeling over extracted. They feel over concentrated, but in a way that's unpleasant. What's the euphemism? They start to get rough. They start to get really rough and gritty and kind of tough. So So we try to manage that.
And that pump over, you sort of said it, we do that early, but when if you do pump overs late, when there's a lot of alcohol, the alcohol will dissolve the coating on the seeds, and that's can be good because you want some extraction from the seeds in there, but not a lot.
It can be
when
too
you start
much, right?
moving that and getting lots of flow by those seeds, you're starting to get stuff that's really kind of, I don't know, angular. What's the opposite of soft? I don't know. Hard, hard, I guess.
I think like you feel it's like gritty. It's like a little rough tasting. Yeah. Anyway,
there's a question. So Denise asked, is there some type of sensor system that allows us to monitor temperature while we're not there? Yes, there are those such things. We do not have one.
They're very fancy. They're fancier than we are.
In a couple of years, when we rebuild the winery, we will get one for sure. And it's really more of an alarm system than anything else. It's not that we need to monitor the temperature every moment and be whatever, but you can. Right now, we do have you'll see the little boxes on each tank. If the tank starts to get too hot, that box will open a valve and bring cooling to the tank. So they do that automatically. What we don't know in the middle of the night is to get an alarm to say the tank's gotten hot because that little box messed up or it was set wrong or something. We don't have that. And
but we do have a cap usually, and it usually works. So, but we have had times when we've come in the morning and it's gotten really hot. Usually we recover, it's not, if it gets too hot, the danger is that it will kill the yeast. The yeast can get, we've had times where we've gotten nervous, but it's usually worked out. It's always worked out. In fact, we've never had it really kill everybody.
The hottest we ever got a wine that I know of, because maybe you didn't tell me, but in 2007, when Sarah was on maternity leave, she left me alone. I put the heating on 2 tanks because they were really cold and slow to start up, and I forgot to turn it off at night. Came back the next morning, and one tank was 36, the other one was 35. It was 2 Syrah. If any of you had the Leafstone 2007, it's one of the best wines
I knew
we
maybe
ever
we
made.
should do it every time. And 32 is like nightmare high temperature. So 36 was bad.
I don't know what happened. I turned it back down. It's still fermented. It turned out to be a great wine. It was we still didn't do it again. No,
not on purpose.
No, I don't think it made the wine better, but the wine was good to begin with. So.
Right. No, I don't think it did. So that's the pump over process. And then, so then we let the wines kind of sit, and the reds will sit in tank. Usually the fermentation is sort of fast in the beginning and slow at the end. And it will take maybe the whole red wine fermentation process is probably 10 days at the most. Usually it's fairly quick, maybe even a week. It depends. And then we'll sometimes let it sit. So depending on how the wines are tasting and what we were thinking about them, we will we'll let them sit on the skins for a while, and they'll just get a little more, but just like a very gentle extraction. We tend to keep them warm but not hot, so they can. It's like the soup simmering on the back of the stove, like very low, kind of even time to just kind of sit and soak, and then it's time to barrel them. So once we feel like we have the extraction, we have the flavors that we want out of the skins, we will open up that same valve and drain all the juice out of the tank. And as much as can come out on its own is put first into another tank to kind of settle the big lazy stuff out of it, and then goes into barrel. And then we have to press the red wineskins, and that's my real favorite. So then what's left in the tank is this kind of spongy cake of skins and pulp and seeds and just a little bit of juice that's in there. And so we open the door, and then we have to shovel it out of the tank. And now we've figured out how to do all of it from the outside, which is much safer from a, an OSHA standpoint and human health and whatever. But before we figured out how to do it, and actually lots of people just like, you actually would climb inside the tank. So I would have to do like this limbo move because the door is about it's about this big. I don't know. That doesn't help because you're on a screen. Well, whatever. It's about as wide. It's a little wider than I am, and it's maybe 3.5 feet off the ground. So I can only get in it backwards. Like I couldn't get in and flip, so you have to kind of like limbo your way in and then pull yourself up. But then you're inside a tank full of wine smells. Yeah, and your rain gear because you're sitting in wine and then shoveling all the skins and everything out. And that is really fun.
So much fun.
Anyway, so then that all goes into the press, and then that is pressed and goes into barrel, and then that's kind of it. Then the red wines go into barrel, and we also stir them. We try to keep kind of the lees in suspension for the first 4 months-ish, maybe 6 months, kind of depending on the wine. And then they will sit in barrel. And then once we kind of get through the lee stirring phase, we put the bungs or the caps on top of the barrels really tight, and we just try to keep them closed. We do open them every once in a while to top them. So we want to keep the barrels very full. So we'll go through, and that is every couple of weeks in the beginning and then every couple of months in the end, because the barrels just lose wine less and less quickly.
The question about the barrels, do we reuse them for whites? We tend to like some new oak, but not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we like some more neutral stuff. So we reuse those barrels for longer. If you think of it as like a barrel program, if we want 20% new oak, that means we have to save our barrels for 5 years and then get rid of them because we have the new ones coming in. So we aim for something like that. And so we might use 5-6 years, the same barrel. After that, they still hold liquid really well. They're just really neutral. The reds, we want more barrel impact, only not barrel flavors. We've done a whole thing on barrel, so I won't go to that rabbit hole. But so we tend to use our barrels twice, usually.
Yeah, most of them twice. Some a little more, but mostly twice. Yeah.
So the Passeggiata, sometimes we use the for the wine that's going to go into Passeggiata, we'll use a third filled barrel. But after that, we sell them to breweries or other wineries that are okay with neutral barrels, or customers who want planters or something, because we use a lot of new barrels and we need room for those new barrels to come in, and they're kicking out the old ones.
Right. Danny had a question about mallow, and I just forgot to even mention mallow. So I've been talking a lot about fermentation, but there's this secondary process, which we call malolactic fermentation, which
not a fermentation.
It's technically an enzymatic reaction. You can really wow your friends with how deep into the wine weeds you are. You make that up.
The bacteria.
You want to be really obnoxious. You can bring that one out and get thrown out of a party.
Fermentation is only yeast.
Only yeast
can create
fermentation, and malolactic fermentation is done by bacteria. So there you go. But there is a bacteria which is very creatively called malolactic bacteria.
If I met a bacteria and a yeast, I wouldn't know which one.
No, you wouldn't. But if you had Michelle's microscope, you could look at it. The yeast looks like a pod.
Michelle's petri dish.
Right, I know. We'll get back to that. So these yeast basically eat malic acid. And they transform it, or their waste product is lactic acid. And so, yeah, exactly. A yeast and a bacteria.
Oh, that's a good joke.
There's a joke there. Right, coming back next week, we need a punchline.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the malolactic kind of transformation, and malic acid is like a very kind of sharp, crisp, bright, strong acid. I'm sure the chemists out there would have a better term, but it's kind of an intense acid. And malic comes from malus, which is the Greek or Latin word for apple. It's the same root. And if you think of like, stick with the etymologies, or etymologies, whatever it is. Yeah, not end. If you think of like a Granny Smith apple, like that really kind of crisp flavor, that's a lot of malic acid. And so for a lot of white wines, we want to keep that. So most of the whites, we don't put through this process because we want that really kind of bright, citrusy crispness. For the reds, we want some acid, but that just kind of throws everything out of balance. So lactic acid is primary acid in milk, and just like kind of a much softer, mellower, milder acid. So that process for us usually goes simultaneously with the alcoholic fermentation. And we do add bacteria to help us do that, because malolactic bacteria are very fussy. So we like to have that process happen as early as possible. So we have this bacteria that we can add that let the process go during the fermentation process. The malolactic bacteria like a very warm kind of environment, and the fermentation environment is nice and warm and cozy for them. The problem with waiting until after is that it tends to get very cold in the cellar. So the malolactic have a hard time completing their fermentation. And we can't add any sulfur. We can't kind of protect the wines at all until that process is done. So we're just kind of, the wines are very fragile when they're going through that process. We do put all of our wines through malolactic fermentation. Yes.
Yes. And there was Ian put in a comment about butteriness in Chardonnay. And there are certain strains of malolactic bacteria that create a chemical like diacetyl. I think that's how you pronounce it. I don't know.
Diacetyl is how I say it, but I don't know that I'm right. Yeah.
Which is that buttery flavor. And so if you want to make a buttery wine, you pick one of these and you put it in, and it creates that buttery flavor. There are also strains that do not have the ability to create buttery flavor, and you can pick those strains. Those are the strains we pick, because we're not fans of that buttery flavor adding to the wine.
Yeah, we're So Michelle, I saw your comments about trying to cultivate the yeast. That would be really cool. We could put it in a petri dish, but then we wouldn't know what to do with it because we don't have that. We don't have the technology. But it would be fun to play with it sometime. So that would be great.
Well, there is diacetyl. Is that right?
No, it's DIYACTYL.
Yeah, but Michelle just put diacetyl.
Oh, diacetyl, how you say it.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Diacetyl.
All right, there you go. From the pro.
That's excellent. Yeah, because I mean,
it would be cool to know.
It would be cool to know. A petri dish is interesting. Michelle's comment about could we just leave a petri dish out? We wouldn't know it was in it, but there is a thing called a pied de cuve that some old world winemakers do, and we've done it sometimes, but not tried. Is you basically pick some grapes 3 days early, and crush them up and put the juice into a bottle or something, and then leave it out in a nice warm place, and the fermentation will start. And then you have this nice fermentation going, and then you pick the rest of the grapes 3 days later, and you just pour this in, and you have a population already of yeast that's gonna go and take it over. I don't really know why we would do that. I wondered about that. We kind of like when you have a natural yeast ferment or a volunteer yeast, let me say. What we always get is a very slow ramp up of fermentation. When you add commercial yeast, you add this huge dose, and it doesn't do anything for a couple hours, and then boom, your fermentation goes, and it's rocking and rolling. And we like the slow ramp. That is a time when we can work the wine, when we can do pump overs, when we can do things that we kind of like. So interesting.
Yeah. So, all right. I think we're heading to the end.
Are we? Oh no.
It's getting late. We're going to talk about blending.
No,
not the end of the whole. Maybe the end of other things, but not that we know of. So I think next month.
You never want to hear your partner say,
we're heading to the end. This is it.
Yeah, it's just not what you want to hear. Sorry.
Oh, that's good to know. You're not like, thank God.
About time.
All right.
You finally took the hint.
I know. I'm always about logistics. So next month we're going to do blending. And I'm sitting here trying to cook up if there was a way we could get samples for people to play with at home. Can we put together some packages? There might be a way. So I'm going to see if I can cook up some evil plans in the next week, because we'd have to get it organized fast, and see if people are interested in trying to play along at home. It'll be fun.
I think of myself as evil, but this is beyond my evil capabilities.
I know. Wouldn't it be fun like we do in the barrel workshops where you get your own wine to play with, and we'll see what we can do. So maybe there's a way to make it work out. Yeah, exactly. Blending home chemistry kit. I can see you make the biggest explosion. I'll see what we can come up with. So while we cook that up, watch this space, watch your email, I guess. We'll try to get out if we come up with anything. And I'm always logistics girl, so I've got a few logistics. So let's see. Number one, this Saturday is our member second Saturday, but we are deciding that we're going to have it indoors and in your own house because it's just too cold for us. Yeah. So we've talked to our musician and they're going to play for us, but over Zoom. So you can tune in if you want. You can hear the live music. It will be live, but it will be live over the screen. We're going to have some Black Ankle folks on, just kind of like these happy hours where we can answer questions and you guys can chat with each other. We can turn our mics off and actually everybody could get to talk. But we have found that we moved it to the day because the people were so cold. And then even the musicians are like, we can't play because we're freezing. So we're still going to stay open all winter, but we're going to have to adjust here and there. So for this Saturday, we're going to go back to evening hours. So music will start, I'm going to say at 6:30. Am I right? 6 o'clock. So the music will start at 6 o'clock. We'll send out a Zoom link where you can log on and just listen in if you want to from home, and then you can drink whatever you want. So that I hope will be kind of good. And for this week, we were going to have the food truck Brick and Fire Pizza at the farm, but we have decided to just do carry out for them. So we will have frozen pizzas available tomorrow and Saturday. And of course, our little charcuterie boxes or the wine or whatever our usual items are. So if you're interested in coming by in the next couple of days to pick that up, you can, of course, have that along with your happy hour. And then for February, I think we're going to try to do the same thing also, where we have the musician just play and do a Zoom. And we're working up another, I think kind of like a soup and salad, like a little more casual dinner with Nick's again. So like a crab soup and salad, and it's Valentine's weekend. So I think we'll throw a few little chocolates in or something to try to make a fun little package. So we can try to have a little fun despite all being stuck at home. And did I forget anything?
February's happy hour.
Oh, February's happy hour, same thing. Oh, whoops. Oh, we're having a guest appearance from Gingy Chocolate. No, she's over there saying, it's okay. No. We're going to reschedule them. All right. Well, that would be really fun. Well, we'll have to do that another day. We'll book them another time. And yeah, so I think, I think you guys know the drill. We're still open, only outside, make your reservations. And I think everything else is going. So it's so great to see so many of you guys. And thanks for, I feel like at the end of Car Talk, you wasted another perfectly good hour.
Yes, right.
Did anybody else listen to Car Talk? Well, you did it.
I know Melissa cringes when she hears us say it. Sarah and I are Black Ankle.
I watch Car Talk, right? Anyway, I just always think that at this point. All right. So I think before you waste a second hour, we should let everybody go. But it was great. It was great to see. This is so cool. You guys, I said, you can't tell because our screen is different, but now I can see so many more people this time, which was really fun.
It's really nice for us.
So it's great. So thank you all for taking your time to be with us in our chaos, and we'll see you. Maybe Saturday or definitely next month. Yes, month. All right. Take care.
Be happy. Be safe.
Yeah. Take care. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.